Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your hosts, Matt, Jeff and Steve. And today we have got an amazing guest all the way from Canada. It's John. How are you, John?
I'm doing great. How about you all?
We're going to talk a lot about John and precision nutrition today, and one of the world's most successful coaches.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm happy to share the story if you guys want to dig into that, or hey, whatever you think the audience is going to get the most out of today, I'm happy to delve in.
Terrific. Well, I know Matt's got a question you want to ask.
Yeah, I do, because I did the normal research like we do and look at our new guests and get a bit of an understanding of where you're from and that sort of thing. When I had a look at your social media pages and I had a look at the content that you put up, but the testimonials, and like when I expected to see, what I expected to see was pages full of before and after photos and people saying I lost this many inches or kilos within this period of time. That's not what I saw at all. I saw really healthy, happy people, and I saw a lot of testimonials talking about how their life has been changed, how that they've learnt lessons that they'll carry on for the rest of their life, that they've achieved their physical goals as well as other goals while going through some sort of trauma or some serious event, or the worst year of my life, and I still achieved all my goals. I was absolutely blown away of the type of changes that you're actually making to people, as opposed to just, like before and afters and, 6-week programs and then see if someone can fix you, And is that because of what you went through? Is that because of, for you, was these sort of campaigns, was coaches and mentors, and that's something different to you personally? Is that what you wanted to achieve with your business?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for pointing that out, because it is. I mean, fundamentally, it's what precision nutrition has become. It's really, there's a concept that we really like to embed in everything that we've done, which we call deep health. And the idea is that this is sort of deeper than just your food or your exercise, but it's, all the 360-degree perspective of how you live an actual human life. And, we've often felt like, hey, when people come to you for, let's call it a body transformation, or at least that's the words or the concept that they identify most with, we really realize that there's some other things going on in their lives. Anyone who's ever coached at the scale we've coached at understands that. There's people don't get into unhealthy relationships with food or with movement or with stress management or with poor sleep without some kind of pain or some kind of difficulty in their life that's well beyond the scope of, did I do my 60 minutes of physical activity today? So that's what we did. We created a curriculum that really, it's like the ultimate positive bait and switch. We're like, hey, would you like to come over here and get in shape? And then when they come over to get in shape, we find our ways into the nooks and crannies of their lives and help them really make profound change, change that will last beyond the, initial phase of weight loss or whatever the case may be. And we're talking about a sort of repairing relationships in their lives, repairing relationships with themselves. So while it's a nutrition coaching program, or in the name of the company's Precision Nutrition, we spend a year with all those clients, helping them repair, helping them move forward with confidence and with new tools that they never would have had otherwise. And so that's why I love when, your folks are researching it and they see this is the kind of difference, the kind of thing that can happen when, and again, there's a very specific kind of process that precision nutrition uses, a deep curriculum that, again, addresses deep health. We know, for example, that when people are under stress, they don't make healthy choices with food as often as they might otherwise if stress wasn't part of their lives. So how do we address the stress and as a vehicle to get to the food, and how do we address poor sleep? We know that when folks have a deficit in sleep, they make poor nutritional choices. There's differences in blood glucose management. Like, it all fits together. But traditionally, the health and fitness industry, or at least, the ones focused on exercise and nutrition only, will just address the nutrition and exercise. And we know that that doesn't stick. It doesn't last. It's not tools if I give you a diet to follow. Instead, we co-create a way of eating that you can see fitting in the context. And this is a phrase we used often, a context of a real human life. right? Because a lot of times that's what folks do. They're like, okay, this part of my life, I want to get in shape. So I'm going to look at food and exercise independent of what's happening with, the aging parents that I care for, or the children, or the job that I have, or all the other things going in my life. And we try and construct and co-create a plan that helps people respect all the other things going on. What can we help you do on your worst day so that we can do it consistently, rather than what plan can we come up with that you can do on your best day? And not everyone has their best day every day, right?
Well, I always say, John, that real change doesn't happen often for people, especially if they've built habits and constructs that they just keep going back to. I liken it when I was younger and doing martial arts. You see a lot of people with a goal to get a black belt. As soon as they get the black belt, they've achieved that, and then they would effectively stop going. It's the same with these 12-week challenges. I mean, if you look at The Biggest Loser on TV as well too, there's a lot of people that do it, but unless they have an epiphany, the old saying is that a tiger doesn't change its stripes, right? So if people don't deal with the foundation, then anything that they build, it seems not to get any roots. I mean, they might be able to change for a period of time, but it's not lasting change. It doesn't become a new mindset and a lifestyle for them. It's just a temporary thing. And this is where you see the yo-yo dieting, you see the fad dieting, the perfect workout, the perfect diet, and none of this stuff really seems to work. So how do you, I know that you've sort of spoken about this, but how do you bring people to that point of realization that they probably might come to you or a personal trainer looking to shed 10 kilos or 20 pounds and put on X amount of muscle? How do you actually shift their mindset to show that it's actually something different? And do you? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, I like a lot of the things you said, and it resonates with how I think about what change really is. And in this context, the question, if it's how do you help someone with this, the way that we envision helping people with this is to turn on a different part of their brain than the frontal cortex thinky brain. Because ultimately there's a framing that I've often used, which is people don't actually want to learn how to get in shape, although that's what they say and that's what they think, right? People want to become the kind of person who is in shape. And those are two different mental compartments that activate that, right? If you want to, learn how to, understand an academic subject, where you get a textbook and you read about it, and maybe there's case studies and those kind of things, right? It's a very academic process, and it activates this sort of higher brain center, the thinking part of your head, which is like right in the front behind your forehead, right? But if we want transformative change in people, you have to engage a totally different brain system. And that's not the part that learns about how many calories you should be eating. It's not the part that learns about how much protein is required for an endurance athlete or a strength athlete. It's a totally different part. It's the emotional part. It's the part that governs routine, behavior, habit, emotion. That part is not ever activated when we just learn, right? So what we've done is think deeply about how do you help someone create new behaviors, new patterns, not necessarily just activating this thinking part of the brain. So, what that means functionally is a series of daily practices that people, and the word practice has a bit of, interesting connotation nowadays. It's attached to things like meditation and yoga. But we can think of it as anything, practicing a new language, practicing a piano or guitar. The idea of daily picking up the instrument or the thing you're working on and doing some of it, right? So for us, it's a series of daily practices that map to a set of skills that you need to build that map to the ultimate goal, right? So I actually have a flow chart that I developed for when we create curriculum. And I share it with all of our clients so they can see the big picture here. So, for those listening in, the idea would be, let's say you take anything you want to learn. So take a piece of paper and at the top of it, make a box. And this will be your ultimate outcome you want to achieve. And you write it at the top of the box, right? So let's say it's play piano or lose weight or whatever, right? And then you have to think about, and if you don't have enough experience with these things, you have to talk to someone who knows, what skills would be required that you need to build to be able to do that thing, right? And then you write those down in sequence. So you think of it like a flow chart, right? Well, first you might need to build this skill. Next you might, so for example, if it's learn to eat better, okay? The first skill you need to is not necessarily eat more protein. It's actually pay attention to how you're eating now. That's the first and most fundamental skill, because if you're not attending to it, you can't fix it in any way, right? So that's the first skill that's required. So then we come up with a series of skills, but those aren't practices, right? That's just stuff you need to be able to do that you can't now. And then underneath each of those skills, you think of the practices that would be required. So for example, with, the coaching program we developed, the first skill is learning to attend or pay attention to how you're eating. The first practice for that is actually to slow down your eating, right? So when you're eating too quickly, you can't pay attention. So for 2 weeks, we literally have people practice this one thing. It's probably the hardest thing that they practice in the entire program, right? Because they're on autopilot. They've been eating forever, right? They eat the way they eat. And we're asking them to slow down, pay attention, sometimes maybe even take notes. And this isn't for the rest of their lives, mind you. This is just for a 2-week block, right? Where this is what I'm working on now. And then after we do that, we actually have them eat until what we call satisfied rather than stuffed, right? So it's, okay, if 80% full is this feeling of satisfaction, 100% full is, wow, I'm really full. And then 120% is stuffed. Each meal we ask ourselves, am I 80%? Am I 100%? Am I 120%? And again, this isn't for the rest of your life. This is just for 2 weeks. So then you can see I've been practicing for 4 weeks, slowing down, being mindful and thoughtful about how I'm feeling and what I'm choosing. Next is stopping before I'm full, right? And this would even be for weight gain clients, by the way. And people are always like, but wait, won't I lose weight? Well, not that much during the first 2 weeks. And this idea of attending teaches you a lifelong skill. Now, let's say weight gain is ultimately your goal. Now we're going to say, okay, you felt what 80% was like. You felt what 100% was like. Now you're going to eat to 120 because that's what's required for weight gain. Right? So again, these are fundamental skills that we practice for short periods. And we do this for an entire year. It's practices, make skills, hit goals, And so over the course of a year, there's a lot of 2-week blocks. So we build out things around food. We build out things around stress management. We build out things around sleep and around exercise. And again, you can imagine these daily practices aren't particularly overwhelming. If all you have to do for the next 2 weeks is slow down your eating when you do eat, that may feel to a lot of people like, gosh, can't we do more? Like, I really want to get in shape fast. Can we just hurry this up along, right? And our thing is like, well, we could do a little more. I could make it a little more challenging for you. But first, show me you can nail this, right? And that's usually our coaching prompt. Great. I see you're ambitious. You want to eat the whole world in one bite. Great. First, show me you can nail what we're actually working on, right? Show me deep mastery of that, and then we'll add stuff to it, no problem, right? And usually people aren't a master of these particular practices, right? And so we let them build over time. And it's the sneakiest thing. At no point does anyone feel like they're doing this overwhelming, all-encompassing change project. But by the end of the year, they say things like what you read, which is,
I'm a new person.
Wow, I wasn't expecting anything that I gained from this. I just expected to lose some weight and maybe exercise a bit more, but I see the whole world differently now. And that's because we've done exactly what transformative change is. It's practices done over time that build new skills that allow you to move into the future with a lot of confidence.
That's one thing we talk a fair bit about on the podcast, is how that darkness can exist in the absence of light. And that a lot of what our mission is to kind of enlighten people of just little moments in time. What you're talking about there, just that little moment to stop and actually go, well, I eat meals all the time. And that meal could be full of darkness if I allow it to. If you actually stop and you're actually thinking about it, you're actually doing those positive affirmations, you're becoming mindful and everything. And that's how we actually can fill up those spots and stop the darkness from invading,
Right.
And that's for all of that stuff.
I like that.
And same with our training.
My little 3-year-old just came in. She wants to say hello to
Oh,
you.
say hello.
cool.
You've got 4 kids.
There she is.
Hello.
We're just getting ready for bed. It's late here in Canada, so she's getting ready for bed. I wanted to say goodnight. Did you want to say goodnight, honey? Yeah. Can I have a little kiss before you go? Because we're doing our podcast now. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Go find Mama.
Oh, so cute.
She's outside.
You want to stay with me for a few minutes? Okay, you can, as long as you're quiet. All right? Is that a good deal? Cool. We have 4 children, and everyone's home all the time now. So so she may visit with us for a few minutes if y'all don't mind.
No, of course
No, that's
not.
right. I love the breakfasts you prepare for them too. You posted on your Facebook page a photo of them, the breakfast you gave your
Yes.
kids the other day. You want to talk about that? It was a unique breakfast. I looked at it, I went, wow, that's awesome. It's very
Yeah,
different.
I mean, people often ask, right? And I love that people ask this, because I think a lot of times with subjects like nutrition or supplementation or exercise or whatever, we can really get locked into this area of like theoretical paralyzation, right? You're like, what's the absolute best way of doing whatever, right? And we forget to ask the people that we're looking for the best way of doing whatever from, what they actually do in their actual life. You know what I mean? People ask me, what supplements what supplements should I take, right? And I'm often like, I'd be interested, obviously, in what the individualized supplement plan would be for me, but I'd be curious what those experts actually take, right? Like if there's an expert in supplementation or exercise or food or whatever, I'd be super curious what they choose to do, right? If they have access to more information than I do, and they've presumably weeded through it all and with experience and wisdom chosen a course, right? It means they've said no to hundreds of options, right? So which options are left? Which options are the ones that they've done the cost benefit analysis on and decided in the context of their own life? That's what I'm really, really interested in. Then we can figure out what's so special about me and how to tweak it and all that kind of a thing. So I love actually asking experts what they do, right? So I love it when people ask me, what do you do with your kids? Rather than how should kids eat, right? Wait, you have kids. You've presumably want them to be healthy and make good choices and keep them alive. So what do they eat, right? So our context is really, really simple, right? It's, they generally eat 3 meals a day with snacks in between and stuff. And during those meals, we feed them protein sources, vegetables, fruits, and exclude all the other carby things, right? And we all know there's plenty of carbs in fruits and vegetables, right? But we don't necessarily put whole grains or any other sources of carbs in there. Well, why do we do it that way? Well, it's because other sources of carbs find their way into the diet anyway, right? I mean, what do most people snack on? Well, it's not, proteins. It's not healthy fats necessarily. It's carbohydrates, especially kids. So we know they're going to be getting those throughout the course of a day. So when it's time for meals, we just have protein. So some source of protein and loads of fruits and vegetables. So we know for sure when we're eating together, that's what they're getting. And then we don't have to feel like the food police the rest of the time. Oh, well, you got a lot of carbs at lunch and dinner, so that's a lot of carbs between meals. Grandma, don't give her that, whatever, right? So it's we can be free to let them snack how they might snack and choose to snack anyway, which gives them a whole bunch of autonomy, right? And then when we have meals together, we know we're covering all their nutritional bases, so they're not going to be deficient in protein and not going to be missing out on fundamental macronutrients and things like that. And so, and the thing is, a lot of parents will then say, but my kids won't eat fruits and vegetables, right? So how do you deal with that? And in our context, we have a particular mental framework for that, which is ever since they're really, really small, we just start introducing different ones to them, right? And so always and forever, gently introducing options, right? So some of our children may be pickier eaters than others, and they might not eat a whole host of fruits and vegetables, but there are ones that they do eat. And we found them by just patiently giving them the options over and over, and so that the work is the parents in this case. And it's a lot of mental emotional work, really. It's the idea, we have this coaching concept Are you taking off, honey, or you want to just sit down? Okay, cool. We have this concept that when you're a coach or parent or leader, whatever, I think they're all the same thing, whether you're coaching a client or parenting a child or leading team members, it's all the same thing, skill with people. But you have to accept, be prepared for, and be okay with the possibility of non-change, right? So if people are coming in, how do I improve something or whatever, you have to accept that they may not change. And that's okay, And if you're okay with that, instantly all this pressure comes off, right? It comes off you, it comes off them. You're not naggy anymore. And then somewhat paradoxically and ironically, they're more likely to change, right? When you're putting less pressure on. So that's how we kind of handle it. It's just this gentle, non-pressured situation where we feed them these things. And then, like when you see my social media posts about how we feed our children, you'll notice that the fruits and vegetables on each of their plates may be different. And that's because we know, hey, our 8-year-old likes these fruits and vegetables best. Our 4-year-old likes different options. And so, they usually eat all the same proteins, and then the fruits and veggies are mixed up, based on their preferences. And then there's no mealtime wars, And the other thing that we do that we find is pretty important is not forcing them to eat at a certain time within a certain window. When they were really little, we put up a small counter, child size, with little children's chairs. The counter is just a butcher block that we just mounted on the wall in the kitchen. And we put their meals there, and we let them take as long as they take to eat. If it took them an hour. If they leave and come back 10 times, that's fine too. And so it just sort of takes a lot of pressure off of the whole situation. And then now, again, we have a 10, 8, a 6, and a 4-year-old. And there's none of the stuff that's going on in other families. And it's not because we're special. It's not because I'm a nutritionist. They don't care, what dad does for a living. It's because of these little practices, again, that have accumulated over time that psychologically work in our favor.
It's incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I find it hard with the children, but I got some really good tips out of there. Especially about that mealtime and zone, because I got one kid that wants to scoff everything down and yell out winner, winner, chicken dinner. And then I got the other one that wants to take 2 days to eat. And
it's interesting, right? Because if you, and it takes work as a parent to really explore your own feelings about these things. Because the one that eats the meal quickly, you're like, somehow you believe that's a good job, right? Like, oh, good job to you, right? Yeah. And you're like, but wait a second. What does that even mean? Why am I rooting for someone to eat quickly? I don't even get that, right?
It makes mum
you
happy.
Are, right?
You've gone through a
so
course
it's like,
deprogramming to slow them down eating in the end, don't you?
That's right. I mean, we have to teach them to eat slowly as a practice to have a healthy relationship with food. And then as kids, we're like rewarding fast eating. Yeah. And it doesn't make any sense, but the reason is because it's more convenient for us as adults. But it doesn't respect anything about who they are necessarily, right? This is coaching, and it's a microcosm of coaching, right? I mean, this is how when we want to show up as an excellent world-class coach, we have to examine all those things about ourselves that we're imposing on clients, and maybe even subconsciously rewarding. Unpack them, ask ourselves why, and then figure out if there's a better way, And it ties back to the original genesis of this question, which was sort of my own personal experiences. I went through some rough times as a teenager and early adult. And so counseling and therapy has been an important part of my life since then. And that's where I learned a lot of what we actually teach to our health and fitness professionals. It's not necessarily that we expect them to be therapists and do the work of counselors and therapists, but they better be familiar with this. I mean, again, it's the same skill set. I mean, if you're standing with a personal training client, if you're sitting with a nutrition client, there have to be deeper conversations than what did you eat for breakfast? I mean, they simply go deeper, whether you even want it to or not many times, right? And so, that was the major inflection point in my career, actually, where, I went and did a PhD in exercise and nutritional biochemistry. I have all the academic credentials that you can have in the field. But then I came out and I was, really, really concentrating on my skill in coaching clients. And I realized I didn't learn all the skills required. And then that's when I went to the field of psychology and said, oh, wait, it's really interesting. No one's taught this in nutrition and exercise and personal training and strength and conditioning. But there's this field over here, change psychology, behavioral science, and they have the answers to all the problems that we're facing right over here, So, and it's not even like an invention of new knowledge that's required. It's actually just a porting of known, psychological tools and bringing them over to health and fitness. And I think that's really what precision nutrition did uniquely. It was, hey, lots of people know about the science. That's easy. All you have to do is read the journals, and do a good internship somewhere. But how do we actually help humans change? Well, that's known, but no one's thinking about it over here. Most of us were handed a legacy in strength and conditioning or nutrition or whatever of this particular mindset, which is, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. All I can do is tell them what to eat. And if they don't do it, then they're lazy. They don't want it badly enough. They're wasting my time, whatever value judgments we cast among, clients. And it's funny because, again, we talked about parenting. Good parents would tend not to do that with their children, right? Like, well, I'm trying to teach my kid how to walk and they won't. So maybe they're just lazy. They're never going to get it. We don't do that, right? We just keep going until they walk. And that is fundamentally what we try and teach all the professionals that have come through, the precision nutrition certification program, rather than you can lead a horse to water, but can't make them drink. You can make them very thirsty. Right? You can't force them to drink. You can't force it, but you can make them very thirsty. And there's tools for that. And we teach those tools.
That psychology, the original definitions and methods for psychology was about how does the body respond to stress. It was never just about the brain. Somewhere along the line, the psychology and that got compartmentalized to talk about how we feel and what we think, and often took it right away from how that may affect our posture, how we eat, how we do all these other things. That it's basically we have mind power, and then we have then you go talk to your coach for your body stuff. So that is so important that you connect them together, because you'd mentioned before about emotional eating and stress, and there was an interesting slide I saw on one of your pages that said, where have I gone wrong, or why aren't I getting my results? And I actually, one of the top answers was, I'm eating too fast. And I thought, what? This is that surprised me, but now it's all starting to make sense.
Yeah.
So understanding psychology and getting away from that stress and the defensive posture so that you're capable. So again, taking the pressure off people, reducing the angst and anger in the gyms and that sort of stuff, and focusing on that love and acceptance. Is that a big part of what you do as well?
It is. I mean, anyone who studied the history of, or the philosophy of science or the history of scientific development knows, people call it sort of the Cartesian dichotomy, right? Where Descartes was sort of the first person who really popularized this idea of the brain body as distinct entities, right? But I mean, if you think about the brain is in the body, it is the body as well. It's an organ, just like so. This is kind of the idea of deep health. How does it all interplay, right? I mean, for example, again, if there's deep stress in your life, your exercise program, no matter how great it looks on paper, needs to be modified if results are going to be what you're after. If there's lack of sleep, it is going to have an effect on the number of calories you choose the next day and what the makeup of those calories is. Now, you may have an iron will, and so day number 1, you may be able to ward off poor choices. But if you get less sleep on day number 2, you may be able to ward it off even then. But eventually, right, you don't have this fortitude to be able to long-term, overcome the signals of, stress or sleep deprivation or whatever. And, the people who argue most about this are bodybuilders. They're like, no, you don't understand my will. but that is most comical to me because I used to compete as a bodybuilder. I won the Mr. USA contest back in 1995. So I've been in that world. And what happens with every bodybuilder when their contest is over? They diet for 12 to 16 weeks. The contest is over and they gain 20 to 40 pounds within the next month after the show. So the people who are yelling most loudly that no, willpower is all you need are the ones who consistently demonstrate that willpower is not what they have.
No, well,
You know what I mean?
and they keep the photos on their phone of food porn. They basically are taking photos, and even people are selectively buying things while they're dieting. I mean, we've got quite a few friends that compete, and they're actually hoarding stuff so that as soon as they finish the contest, they can just plow straight into it. And that's what I was saying before, is like that for a period of time, 12 weeks, 16, 24, you can sort of hold back the tide, but eventually the tide's going to win, right? So you've got to change that fundamentally,
That's exactly it. It's so funny you mention that because my first the first contest I dieted for, I remember there was a woman who was a successful national level competitor and she was incredible. And she would literally bake like treats, pies, cakes, cupcakes, cake, everything. And during her contest and bring it to the gym and just make other people eat it, and she would watch.
Well, other competitors? Other competitors by any chance?
This is it was so fascinating, right? And then I did my first big contest diet, and I remember every day when I have a break in the day, I would read cookbooks, and I'm like, and I would consistently see this, and again, we can pretend it doesn't exist or whatever, but this is fundamental human nature, human psychology, right? When you're in a big energy deficit from exercise plus food restriction, you will seek food. I mean, we used to, when I was a PhD student, we had a host of rodent labs. We did primarily human research, but there were rat labs all around us. And I remember they did this one study where they would withhold food from rats. And then when you would do this energy restriction, which a lot of the research after that, talked a lot about how caloric restriction is so helpful for longevity, right? And it was primarily rodent research. But the one problem with the early research was, when you have rats in these cages, there's generally a little wheel for them to get their exercise on. And when you would restrict their calories, they would actually run all night on the wheel. And this is called food seeking behavior, right? So if they were actually out in the wild, they would be running around looking for food. And because they're in a cage, they'd just be running on their wheel. So the question was it the calorie restriction that was important to the longevity gains, or was it the exercise, or was it this combination of both? No one really knew until they took the wheels out of the cage, right? So humans do the same thing. It's food seeking behavior, right? And this is primarily why we often feel kind of bad when we're energy restricted for too long. Our catecholamines, our epinephrine, our norepinephrine start climbing. And this is human food seeking behavior. This is the fight or flight hormones telling you, you don't have to fight, you don't have to flee, you have to go find food, right? And you'll notice this when people are energy restricted, they'll start sleeping less. It happens tons in competitors. I remember when I would compete, I'm a 8 to 9 hour a night sleeper. That's just how I feel best. But when I would compete, I'd be down to 5 hours a night and I couldn't sleep anymore, and it would just be because I'd be constantly sort of mid-grade high levels of catecholamines
on the wheel,
the energy restriction.
You'd be on the wheel all night.
Essentially, that was it. Yes. Yeah. It was basically the same system that would have had me run on the wheel.
Yeah.
Which is why sleep and routine is so important, I suppose. So for those people that after they've had their calories for the day, and it's really important to get to bed at a reasonable time before you start to get hungry again and then start that food-seeking behaviour. So there'd be that window where people, if they get to sleep at a reasonable time, that can avoid that whole process, because that shouldn't happen when you're asleep.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I find one of your great quotes in your book called Changemaker, which is a brilliant book, and it's on the screen there. I skipped through it yesterday. And one of the quotes you said you saw a big disconnect between people working in the health and fitness industry and the people who they were supposed to be helping. So you saw this big disconnect between the coaches who probably talked about what they have for breakfast and, hey, work out more, eat less, and do that. And this amazing quote, it makes a lot of sense now. But do you want to elaborate on that? Because I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for a long portion of my career, I founded and ran Precision Nutrition, and it became the world's largest sort of coaching and education company in the nutrition space. And in 2017, I ended up selling my ownership of the company, and that's when I spent 2 years putting together Changemaker, the book you just quoted. And for me, it was, essentially, I wanted to capture everything I've learned in 30 years in the field. And I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I worked really hard and ran this company for a lot of years. And if I never did anything in health and fitness again, I wanted to say, hey, here's everything that I've learned. I'm going to put it in this one book. It's going to go on Amazon for $20, and it'll help people getting started. It'll help people in the field and trying to figure out what to do next. So that's where that came from. I mean, this is sort of the next act of my career, if you will. And a big part of what sort of really drove my purpose when working in the health and fitness field was that very thing. This, I call it in the book, the gap, right? There's all these professionals, and they've made their hobby essentially their career, right? So I love exercising. I love food. My hobby is now my career. I mean, what a blessing for most people, right? I mean, how many people on earth can say that they have the luxury of making the thing that they want to spend all their free time doing, the thing they also get paid for? Mm-hmm. So this isn't a problem, right? Everything in life has pros and cons. So this is the pro of making your hobby your career. The con is there's all these people out there that need help, that are at the very beginning of the journey that you're in a very late stage of, right? I mean, a good evidence of this is when you have like new clients, right? So people who are just learning about health and fitness, and within 3 months, their goal is enter a bodybuilding or a physique type contest, doing a strong man or woman or powerlifting type event, doing a Tough Mudder or some kind of obstacle race, right? It's weird. If you think about it, that's weird, right? This person has no history of physical activity, right? Maybe they're a drama teacher in a high school and they were 30 pounds overweight with type 2 diabetes. Why is their goal to do an obstacle course race, right? What is that? Well, it's handed down from whatever coach they found, right? It is sort of inherited from the professionals in the space, right? Which, again, it's fine if that's what eventually resonates with them, cool. But there are a lot of people who ought not make that their goal. There are a lot of people who, if that has to be the goal, they're just going to opt out altogether. Yeah. Like, hey, I don't want to go on that journey. I just wanted to get my type 2 diabetes in check and be able to fit into size medium shirts or whatever. You know what I mean? And feel like I'm, going to live to see my children grow up, or whatever the case may be, whatever is important to them. So I feel like this gap is really sort of alienating to this huge swatch of potential clients, And again, if you're the kind of person who's like, hey, CrossFit changed my life, let's say, and now I only want to coach CrossFitters, that's cool. Make that conscious choice. Just know now you're niching down in a niche, right? Your potential business is very small. You're never going to make great money doing that. And the impact that you'll have in the world will be smaller. Let's face it. I mean, those motivated CrossFitters were going to find success, whether they found you or not. But there's a lot of people who, if they don't find you, they may never sort this out in their lives. So I just wanted to sort of remind people that that's out there too, that there is this big group of people. And, I have a friend in New York. His name's Mark Fisher. I don't know if you all have heard of him, but he runs a very successful group of fitness facilities called Mark Fisher Fitness. Mark comes from the theater world, Broadway. And his wife is a professional dancer in theater shows, and he was an actor. And so he started a set, and their language is brilliant and it's very specific. And they call it sort of the Mark Fisher Fitness Ninja Warrior Clubhouse or Ninja Clubhouse. And I mean, they attract the dramatic bunch, right? They attract the theater group, right? And these are not people who are like, I'm doing this for the powerlifting meet or the physique show or the Tough Mudder. these are folks who have a whole different set of goals and wants and needs and why they're there and what their why is. And they brilliantly leave all this sort of handed down fitness industry cliches at the door, and they welcome these people where they're at, and introduce them to a wide palette of goal sets. And it's so cool. And in part, I bring it up because if you were to go check out what they do, it is so far from the mainstream of fitness that it provides a really nice example, like a counterpoint. But, and you don't have to go to that extreme. I mean, there's images of Mark in his underwear with a unicorn head on, you know what I mean? Like this is what they do. But again, not to say you have to do that, but you'll see like there's the one end of the spectrum. Okay. We're going to be tough and strong and do physical conquest feats. And then this other end where they're running around in G-strings in a group fitness class, you know what I mean? With unicorn heads on and interesting outfits. And then there's this whole spectrum.
Yeah, sounds like another day at the gym
there's
for
this
me.
whole
another day in the office, really.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it just reminds you, right? Like, hey, how can we show up and embrace all the potentialities that are there for people, as coaches? And then that's become super important to me. And again, it's a great reminder too, that there's a lot of options for working in the health and fitness field. If this is what you want to do, if you want to turn your hobby and your passion into a career, most people just think they have to coach. Hey, this is what you do. You become a personal trainer, you go work at a gym and you get people ready for physique contests or Tough Mudders or whatever, right? And I'm like, there's so many jobs, there's so many options. You don't even have to be a coach if you want to come work in this field. One of my greatest delights is having young people come in who are not a good fit for personal training or nutrition coaching per se, and helping them decide not to do that, but still to do something in the health and fitness field that fits their unique abilities, that fits their values, that fits their real purpose.
Amazing. It's funny because you mentioned about going to a gym. You co-authored a paper on, I'll call it coaching in women, and it was published in Internet Interventions 2017. Now, firstly, when I looked at it, I thought, why is there a coaching article in Internet Interventions? And basically it's a trial you did, and you may want to talk about it, but basically it was an online course that was highly successful for promoting women's health online.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things, it's easy to get on a microphone, and if you've got good words, to talk about how great your stuff is or whatever. But for us, I come from a research background, and, what precision nutrition became at one point was this beautiful fusion of all the things I love, right? I always loved writing. I love research. I love data, so by the end of my ownership, I was basically the editor in chief, the director of the science program, and the director of marketing. So that seems like a weird diversity of roles, but it's just my favorite things: storytelling and data, Yeah. And so for me, precision nutrition's coaching aspect, where precision nutrition coaches clients, is the world's largest body transformation research project. I mean, there's been nearly 200,000 clients that have gone through that program, one full year each. And data points, it's all online. So literally daily data points on 200,000 people over 365 days. And you have everything from logins to self-reported weight to self-reported body composition to, we do resiliency surveys, all kinds of emotional indices. We even had subsets of groups where we did genetic testing on. So we would look at psychological variables, we would look at genetics, we would look at, where you do a DNA test on them to see what their genes look like. And so, of course, coming from science background, I want to do research. I want to publish this stuff. And so I think the paper you're referring to, is it the one in the breast cancer survivors?
It was about
or wait,
about.
that might have been the one with the women in British Columbia, because we did 2 or 3 papers that year. One was with a group through a physician's practice group, where we actually put them through the coaching program I talked about earlier, and we looked at health outcomes.
Yep.
And we did 2 other papers that year with young adult breast cancer survivors, where we actually put them through our coaching program as part of their recovery from breast cancer treatment.
Yeah, this was not the breast cancer one, but it was one where you put them through a 1-year curriculum of daily exercise, nutritional habits, and healthy behaviour lessons, along with access to a one-on-one coach, and it was a fantastic outcome for the women. Even things like their HDL, which is the good cholesterol, improved, as well as lost weight and all that sort of stuff, and got better. But their health improved, their blood pressure dropped. It was quite incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those were some fun papers to do, because with that particular group, what happened was the lead medical doctor had actually gone through the program as a client, and she was like, "This is amazing. This is life changing. We need to do research on this." I'm like, "Oh, we do research all the time." And she's like, "But what if we took like 30 or 40 of my patients, and we put them through the coaching program, and we measured everything in our office, and we measured thyroid hormone, and we measured blood glucose, and we measured cardiac outcomes and things like that." And I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," because we can't do that easily through the web, right? We can measure other things, but this we can do. And yeah, I mean, it was it's one of those things where these outcomes are happening because people are telling you. You can't coach 200,000 people without people sharing their blood results and stuff, but to actually do a trial that we can publish and then say, okay, look, there really are clinical outcomes here that are super positive, was really cool to do.
See, with the science, it's awesome that you're doing the science, because you get the data you need to show that you end up with results, not excuses, through your program, which is great. Mm-hmm. However, the other benefit of science is you get that in-depth understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. And again, it's one thing to tell someone what to do, but if you have that ability to actually explain why they're doing it so that they get that understanding, and if you don't understand how it happens, then you can't actually explain it or teach it to anyone. So having that extra data and that science about your specific program would be, that in itself will improve your results and the outcomes that your clients would get, which is, that's genuinely impressive. I was curious though, you mentioned it was something I was going to ask, but you just alluded to it then. When you're doing these online programs, how do you monitor body composition? Is there do you send people out to get calipers or a machine?
Yeah.
Or is it?
Well, in the early days, and we modified this when the program started scaling much wider. When people would sign up, they would get a package in the mail from us that included a whole bunch of things. One of which was body composition calipers, right? So then we would instruct people on actually how to use them, or if they didn't feel competent in that, we would tell them how they could find someone locally to do that for them once a month or whatever the case may be. And then now, it's interesting. I was about to say something. I'm like, this is going to sound weird unless I provide context. But, when we started Precision Nutrition, the world was on dial-up, right? So, I mean, nowadays, the idea of submitting photographs of yourself online is easy. It's a no-brainer, right? Like, people are posting billions of photographs every day. But you couldn't do that in the early days. Right? It's too much bandwidth, right? Your website couldn't accommodate that. It'd crash the site if even a couple hundred people did that. So the point being, eventually we moved to photographs, and we found that if you just monitor body weight, photographs, and then a series of self-reported things, how happy are you with your progress this week in this domain and that domain, it's good enough. Does someone actually need to say, my body fat went from X to Y, if they're happy with how their waist is, how their arms are, whatever. So we started moving to clients' self-reported measures, because ultimately, they become interesting in the context of what we're trying to do, which is make clients feel better about what's happening in their bodies and in their lives, right? So, and then that became interesting things to study eventually too. You know, like when you can get some genetic data and some psychometric profiling, and then compare that against some of these other self-reported things, you can actually start to do some really interesting exploratory work, right? Like, are there relationships between, we were looking at simply showing up, like logging in and doing your work each day, and some kind of genetic markers or psychometric markers. You know, there may be people who have lost the most amount of weight, but because of some psychometric profile, they're the least happy with their outcomes when the program's done, or the least resilient or whatever. So these are the kind of things we love mining, because it's, again, so much data. You know, in the early days where it was just me doing the science work, it was overwhelming. And now I think PN has several data scientists working on the team, just working with this data alone.
Incredible. I've got a quote that one of your favorite quotes out of your book again. I love this one. It says, no matter how beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. I mean, I'm a bit guilty of that. When I started naturopathy back in 1847, you know, we were told this is what you do to get someone lean. You do this, and if they don't do it, stuff them. And it was incredible, because, you know, that's the way you have to do it. And if you fail, well, it's not my fault, it's yours. And so I love that quote. That the strategy to us was beautiful in the early days, but the results were mixed. So, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an error, I mean, that I see humans doing over and over again, right? I mean, it's an error that's happening consistently in the world we live in today, not just in exercise and nutrition. I mean, we're in a difficult time with respect to COVID and, you know, communicable diseases and things like that. And most of the dialogue is beautiful strategy talk, you know what I mean? And it's often devoid of some kind of sobering glimpse into the reality of what's happening, you know? And I think, you know, it's that quote is something I've said for 20 years now. And it's something that I keep just having, I love having, because it reminds me, because I slip into that as well, right? It's, you know, for people who are thinking people who are trained, you know, I have minors in philosophy and psychology, so I love thinking, right? And for thinking people, it's very easy to slip into this kind of cognitive world and to forget that, hey, most of what we're trying to do is produce an outcome, right? I mean, I've had this conversation lately, and sometimes I go on these weird, you know, pseudo-psychological and philosophical tangents. But lately I've been thinking about this one thing a lot. Like, what is the purpose of talking with people, right? And this sounds weird, like, where's this guy going with this? But I mean, really, if you think about it, why would we talk to other humans? What's the goal of that, right? And generally, it's to accumulate some kind of knowledge that'll help me act better tomorrow than I was acting today, whether it's to, you know, cook some food, or to, put a shingle on my roof. So something very pragmatic, right? Or about how to be in the world, right? Or it's to develop a emotional connection with someone, right? Like, so sometimes we talk with other humans to bridge a gap, right? To create a relationship. And other times it's to accrue information so that we can be better tomorrow than we were today. And I can't for the life of me think of a lot of other reasons for why we talk to others. It's either relationship, or it's to accrue some kind of wisdom or experience that they might have that I can use effectively. And so it's certainly not half and half, right? So, but nevertheless, let's say it was half and half. So when we talk to humans, half the time it's for relationship, and the other half it's to learn something that's useful. Then at least half of the time, no matter how beautiful the strategy, we should look at the results, because that's what we're trying to do, a result, right? That's why we talk to other humans, to get a result. So again, for me, it's such a cornerstone thing that's often lost, especially now in internet debates. And I mean, even beyond internet debates, people complain about social medias, for example. But for those of us who spent time at scientific conferences, the same kind of thing happens. You know, it's just slightly more educated discourse, but it's the same nonsense. Really, if you just strip down and you put different words in placeholders for the emotions that are being conveyed, it's still happening because we get enamored with the theories and the strategies that we think are so elegant, and forget there's a reason for these things in the first place, right? We have to produce something, right? What is being produced? And if my theory is beautiful and it produces the result, and your theory is beautiful to you and it produces the same result, we should figure something out together. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to consistently prove which one's right or wrong.
The amount of times that we hear from really intelligent minds about collaboration and about learning from one another rather than trying to prove through ego that they're right and everybody else is wrong. It seems the older crowd, and I know, Matt, you're talking a lot about the guys that that you've dealt with, that they really want to learn from one another and, and open up discussion as opposed to shut it down and everybody's wrong except for me.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anybody really.
Yeah, we
except for one person's ego.
We created that wicked graph at one stage of the perceived knowledge versus experience, and it was a bell curve. And the ego was the thing that would stop it. You know, that's the one thing that'll stop you from learning is once you have that belief that there is a potential to absolutely know everything there is about a topic. You get to a level of knowledge where you realize there is so much to know, you couldn't possibly know everything. And that's when collaboration and further learning happens. An interesting thing you mentioned earlier about the debates that happen on a Facebook stream of comments compared to in the scientific actual conference. The main difference I see is I think they use more references in the Facebook comments than they do in the actual. There's more, what do they call the Credible Hulk versus the Incredible Hulk was just how many references they put in their post.
That's right.
But
yes, that's right.
I'm dying to. Oh man, I could do another couple of hours worth of podcasting just discussing this data. You've just like opened a massive can of worms in my brain. I'm just writing all these notes. I want to know about have you noticed any specific genetic polymorphisms? Is there specific SNPs that you've seen as a pattern with certain particular body types? Have you noticed any other links there? And now I want to know about your data regarding that 2 weeks. You keep mentioning these 2-week programs, and I'm sitting there thinking, is that the data suggests that 2 weeks is the magic number to create change? Because the naturopaths used to talk about 21 days. I just want to know all about this data, and I want to. We probably don't have time for me to go through, and I would rather compile.
I'll share with you my favorite.
Questions.
I'll share with you my
please.
learnings. And this is going to be so incredibly underwhelming on one hand, but on the other hand, really useful. I think when it comes to some of the, let's say, genetic polymorphisms, for example, there's little tiny things, but none of them mattered enough. You know what I mean? None of them mattered enough. But what we did find was, and it's really interesting. We use this psychometric profile called the caliper profile. And I first heard about it I worked in sports for a lot of my career. And I learned about it because the Toronto Raptors were using it to screen draft picks, right? So at the highest level of sport, talent, is, I don't know, it's within a thin sliver of standard deviation, right? Like when you're recruiting draft picks, everyone's really good, and in a sport like basketball, for example, there needs to be sort of the notion of team chemistry, like people are playing specific roles on the team, right? You may draft someone who fits in better with a superstar athlete, and they may not be as good as a standalone basketball player, but you draft them anyway because of the team dynamic you're looking for, right? So we started using the caliper profile to screen for our own team for hiring, right? And then we started using it with clients, and it has a host of domains, psychological domains, right? So introversion, extroversion, right? And it doesn't call it that, but they're similar to those, are you a risk taker or not a risk taker? So there's all these different things. And those are the domains that produce the most interesting outcomes for us when we looked at that compared to results in this body transformation program. And, one of the biggest correlations that I always found really fascinating was this relationship between introversion, extroversion, or the equivalence of those, and success in the program. Yeah, people who were more introverted tended to do better in our online program than people who were not, right? And of course, it makes sense, But I mean, this is a really critical thing to my Changemaker book, right? Like people's unique abilities, which is what I help professionals find, is essentially this idea of like, what, do you have the potential of being world-class at or are world-class at? What do you really love doing that you could see yourself doing for the rest of your career, and what makes a difference, right? Like, so when you do this thing, it makes a difference for whatever your metrics of meaning are, right? So that's what, ideally, those of us who can afford computers to listen to podcasts, so, the slice of the world that we're addressing right now, would spend some time figuring out how to actualize that. How do I use my unique abilities in the service of some purpose in my career, right? And I find that a lot of people in this introversion extroversion domain, nowadays, for example, let's say it's in coaching. There's a lot of talk about online coaching, right? Gyms have been closed for months, and everyone's like, "Oh, you have to go online," right? And again, we found this with our team members. If you hire extroverted people to be online coaches, it goes very badly. People, because you think about the job, right? Not what the title is, but I will sit at my computer all day to work, right? Who does better at that? Who does better at reading communication, right? It's people who are introverts who've tended to stay home a lot in their lives and read books. You know what I mean? They enjoy that. They thrive in that environment. They feel energized by that. And the same thing tended to happen with clients, is the point, right? People who are used to reading a lot, who are used to spending time, like consuming information through that medium. And also there's a lot of Socratic questioning in our coaching program, for example, where rather than telling you what to do, we help provoke self-knowledge through Socratic questioning, right? And so introverts tend to be better at that as a group. They tend to enjoy that kind of internal work, right? So that was the biggest correlation that we found, that people who tend to be more introverted tend to enjoy the nature of this kind of Socratic, collaborative, online, reading-based coaching effort. And people who aren't that tend to do worse. And it was one of those things that you're like, well, duh. But it's not duh when you're creating a program. It's not duh when you're trying to find a job. You know what I mean? When you're, hey, my gym's closed, I'm going to go into online coaching. It's not, none of this is self-evident. But after the fact, you're like, oh, of course, the strongest correlation of success in this program is this dimension right here. Wow. That's really, really interesting, Yeah.
So, John, obviously you've built Precision Nutrition. You've done incredibly well. Then you've sold out, but you're still obviously working with the company. And
I don't do very much with the company. I still love them. I hired all of my replacements. They're all there. They're all doing excellent work. I love everything PN's doing right now. And periodically they call me. I basically, as we did that transition, and the transition took a good year. For me to hand off all of my roles, the things that were left were, you guys can, essentially some rules, right? You guys can call me if you have any questions about culture, right? How did we create the culture that we did? And if certain decisions might be in keeping with that or not, right? More like a consultant or a resource. 2, historical knowledge. Why did we do things the way we did back in the day? And then 3 is coaching. If someone on the team wants coaching about the things that I'm an expert in, right? I'd be happy to help with coaching. But I found that, transitioning out of a company is hard, especially when the whole team used to look to you for decisions and leadership and all that. And if you're too involved, it becomes sort of counterproductive. You undermine some of the authority of the new people if you hang around too much. So yeah, for me, I'm a huge fan. There's some rules about like how we communicate, but I'm not a decision maker in the company by any means. That's what the leadership team's for. So in like business lingo, I'm not operationally involved at all.
Right.
But I help out if folks' leadership team gives me a call.
And then you went into writing now. Obviously, that's not your first book, though, is it? That's like your 5th or 6th book, is it?
Changemaker. Yeah, it's my first one of this kind,
right.
This sort of career, professional development type of resource. Yeah, prior to that, it was subject specific stuff, which is such an interesting journey, really, because, I thought writing Changemaker was going to be super easy. I was like, oh, I'm just going to sit down and write down everything I know and we'll make a great book out of it. It's way harder to write a fully scientific referenced book about food, right? Or exercise or body change or whatever. It turns out this is the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
It really was.
Getting it
I loved your title. The other one, Scrawny to Brawny. I think I might need to buy that one, actually.
and then in terms of what's next for you, what are you doing right now, and what's the future for you looking like? What are you passionate about? How are you making a change, I guess? I mean, again, if you've been a part of Precision Nutrition for, what was it, 17? How many years were you running that company?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started an early version of it in like 2000, 2001, and then officially in sort of 2005. So it's been plenty long.
Yeah, well over a decade. So what's your main driving focus now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the Changemaker book came out, and that was just going to be like my parting gift to the industry, if you will, right? Everything I think I've learned, as I published that, I realized, oh, you know what? There's a cool business around this, sort of like creating events and courses that are around this idea of career and all the elements that make up a career, because health and fitness, sadly, isn't really that. It's kind of a glorified hobby. If you go in and be a personal trainer, how many personal trainers are doing this for 30 years, right? They're not. There's very, very few. I can name a few, but it's only a few. How many strength and conditioning coaches, and that's a little bit sad to me, because I think it's such an important job, and many people are just dropping out of it early. So I feel like it's not the career's fault. It's just the lack of guidance. There's lots of options and opportunities. One example I give constantly is, Phil Caravaggio was the co-founder of Precision Nutrition with me. And so when we sold our shares of the company, we had to hire in people to take over the roles we were filling in the company. And as we looked for those folks, editor-in-chief. What does it take to hire a world-class editor-in-chief? What does it take to hire a world-class product development person? And we found it takes a lot of money. Some of these folks, and these are folks who are as passionate as any coach about health and fitness, right? They have a strong practice in their own lives. They exercise regularly. They eat well. It's part of their family's culture. But then they had other things they were interested in, like writing, for example, or technology and coding and programming and development of technology. And these are folks who are making 500, 600, 700 grand US a year doing that work. And I'm like, man, these are career paths for people. These are real career paths for people who are passionate about health and fitness. But again, the tunnel vision is go into coaching, right? And so anyway, I thought, hey, I'll do this book. And then I know, Precision Nutrition was actually the answer to a problem, which is people don't necessarily get better from books, right? Again, it's the wrong part of the brain you activate. I think probably books can introduce people to new ideas. And when they interface with other people over those ideas, there might be some spark of change, but it's not reliable. I wouldn't bet on a book being the thing that changes a person's life. But counseling, coaching, mentorship, they are much higher probability vehicles for change, right? So it sort of led me to getting a cool group of young people together and starting this Changemaker Academy thing that we started, which is sort of a fleshing out of the book. And so we're creating courses and things for people who are in health and fitness and they want to turn this passion of theirs into a real career. So that's one part. But it's only part. And, as we talked about, we have 4 kids. And one thing I've wanted to do for a long time now is write some children's books. So that's in the works right now. So my wife and I, and the kids too, they're really active parts of this, have just finished 3 children's books that we're putting through the development pipeline right now. So that's a really exciting thing that we're doing as a family. And then something totally unrelated. Like I've really always been interested in sort of sustainable housing and development. So we're doing a big housing project with my father-in-law, actually, and we're developing 300 homes right now. And it's my first foray into that. And, sort of feels irrelevant to this conversation, but it's not, because part of the thing that's so interesting to me about it is approaching new subjects with beginner's mind, right? I have had a successful business now, and I've had a lot of success in this industry. So I have confidence, and I have resources, and I have decision-making skills and all the things you build up. But now I'm walking into a new space with no domain expertise, right? And that's really fun. It's fun to walk in and, we talked about the problem of ego. It's standing in the way of learning. Now, this is an exercise in the opposite of that, right? If I walk in and I'm like, I'm really smart, I've accomplished so many things, this project goes really badly. You know what I mean? But if I can practice beginner's mind, and, in my life, I always look for things like this. And another one, I recently decided to learn to play the piano, and our daughter, who's 10, started when she was like 4. So she's pretty good, right? And so it's fascinating to me to have this relationship with her where I'm worse at her than something, right? I can demonstrate not only being worse, but trying to get better, like what it takes, right? Because kids are used to seeing their parents be good at all the things. You know what I mean? So it's just another little fun aspect of what I'm trying to do with my life now, which is, at PN, I was sort of the spokesperson for the company, and I was the leader. So like you're in a deep domain expertise, right? With a lot of skills, and sort of often your authority is unquestioned. So it's kind of cool going into these new spaces where you have no believability, right? Building it from scratch.
There's a great book called Who Moved My Cheese, which I recommend. In fact, it's probably more timely for anybody to read that. I don't know if you've ever read that book, John.
I haven't. I've heard of it, though. I've heard good things about it, too.
Yeah, and look, you could probably pick it up and read it in a couple of hours in an afternoon. It's relatively small. But, obviously, John, can I ask how old you are, if you don't mind sharing?
I have my 46th birthday in 3 days.
Oh, there you go. We're the same age. So the interesting thing is that if you built your career, and a lot of people feel like they're a one-trick pony. They've got one thing in them, and then that's it. And with COVID-19, obviously the world's under a lot of change as well too. And I don't want to get too philosophical, but a lot of people are going to be listening to this podcast. They're going to be really evaluating, have I got the right career? Have I actually, especially if they're in the health and fitness industry, do I love it? Do I love the people that I'm helping?
Yeah.
Is the expectation of what I got into actually the reality of what I'm doing? And if not, change. Also, change might be forced upon you because of what's happening with COVID. There's a lot of people that are going to be struggling. I mean, during the Great Depression, some amazing businesses and some amazing breakthroughs came out of, as they say, the mother of all invention is necessity, right? So we've got to have different mindsets and how to approach things. So the fact that you've been successful is great, because you've brought this change on probably for your own well-being, your own discovery, your own enjoyment from life. So I mean, you're starting from a position maybe a little bit stronger and more enviable for people, but it's still the same thing. It proves that it can be done. So I think your website,
and I'm not immune to the thing that you talked about. There have been moments during this transition where you ask that question of yourself, like, hey, am I going to be a one-trick pony? You know what I mean? Yeah. Or can I translate this into other things? And this was one of my every few years I set an intention, if you will. That's kind of a cliched thing nowadays, but I just say, what is the thing I'm going to work on for the next few years? What's really important to my personal development, not for my field, but as a human, So the last major project, it was sort of a 5 to 7 year project, was this idea of how could I spend time actively cultivating wisdom? Right. So that was a big project of mine over a host of years, not to say that I've attained it or whatever, but it was just like, if I went about figuring out what wisdom is and trying to discover what it means to work on that, what would that look like? And the one that has been the last couple of years for sure, and it happened at the sale of Precision Nutrition, essentially. All of a sudden it went from, I grew up in an immigrant family. We didn't have any resources. I didn't start Precision Nutrition with anyone else's money. It was bootstrapped from the beginning. We never even had bank loans. We just sold a few things, made a little profit, invested that back in the company. So Phil and I never really even had much money until we sold the company, because it was all just invested back into the company. But when we did, I had to have this meeting at the top of the Scotiabank Tower in Toronto, right? So it's one of the highest banking towers in Toronto. So I go to Toronto, I ride the elevator all the way up to the top, and there's about 10 or 12 people who are business people in suits, and probably the average age is 10 to 12 years older than me. And they know a lot about things I know nothing about, finance, wealth management, investment, insurance, all this stuff. And I'm sitting and I show up in my t-shirt, and, we always ran a virtual company, so I don't even own professional clothes. So I show up and I'm sitting in this room going, this is the next chapter of my life. How do I decide on things that I don't have any domain expertise about? Who do I have to become for that to happen? Because I've always known stuff about nutrition and science and physiology, and that's what I had to decide on. Now I'm sitting in a room and there's all this stuff I have to decide, because it's my life and my financial future and my family's. It's up to me, right? I can't just let them decide, right? And then if something goes wrong, be like, oh, it was the accountant's fault. That doesn't fly, right? You're in charge, you're the captain. So what do I need to do? So that's really this phase of my life right now. And I think it dovetails nicely with what you were talking about. It's essentially an intention to figure out how to make decisions on things that I'm not an expert in.
But the funny thing
how
is,
can I get really good at that?
As well too, and Matt's actually had a really good saying, because he says, look, as far as the body, as far as hormones, he's an expert, and in fact I'd say he's probably one of the foremost experts in the world as far as how to create nutrition, and his understanding of the body. He's probably raising his eyes, but he's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met, but he's saying as well too, with this sort of stuff, with the accountancy sort of stuff and the business sort of stuff, that's not what I'm great at. But he came up with a saying, which is, and you'll probably say it better, Matt, if I get it wrong, which is, there are no, I'm just going to ask the dumb questions. I'm sorry if I have to slow things down. I'm not going to go along with it unless I understand it. And I think that's beautiful. Well, yes. It's one of the things that, you can trip yourself up, because ego wants you to kind of go, well, I know what I'm doing, and I've been successful, and I've got this company, and I know what I'm doing. But it's like, no, hang on, actually, I may be an expert here, but I'm not an expert here. So I'm going to ask the questions. And I think that's one of the things that we're doing, I think, as a company as well, too, is trying to get that wisdom. And that comes by letting go of the ego and just asking questions, and surrounding yourself, just like you do in business, with an exceptional team. And we've kissed every bad consultant. We've had some terrible accounting and legal advice. Oh my gosh, just amazing. But I think wisdom comes sometimes by going through it, obviously, right? By making the bad decisions, by kissing the toads, before you actually start to say, oh, actually, no, I resonate. That person, I do trust them. They explain things to me. They're not trying to, as Matt says with consultants, make you feel like an idiot, and then lift themselves up saying, don't you worry about this, I've got this, right? And anytime you ask a question, making you feel stupid for asking it. So sorry, Matt, I'm kind of saying what you say all the time.
We were saying something you said earlier, and when we're talking about the science, when you have a good understanding of something, you should be able to explain it to someone simply. So if I'm in a room of so-called experts and they're using a language I don't understand because I'm not financially literate, I don't sit there when I'm talking to them, refer to their temporomandibular joint and their mandible moving. Exactly. When I just say, why are you talking? And I say, I don't use those stupid words from my industry to talk to them about theirs. So if I don't understand, I'll ask the stupid questions. If they understand, they will be able to explain it to me in a way that I understand and I get it. At any point, if they can't explain to me what they're trying to say, it gets, and I have to keep asking questions, it seriously gets to a point where they realise they don't understand it well enough to teach it. And therefore, if they do have that ability to teach me, for someone that's totally not financially literate, then I can get the confidence that they actually know what they're talking about enough to explain it, and then therefore get the confidence that they may actually not be a con person. And that when we're talking about the con in the consultant, it can relate to confidence man, which is where they destroy your confidence and replace it with theirs.
That's what I was trying to say.
I lifted this idea from Ray Dalio, who's a billionaire hedge fund investor. He was actually really instrumental in helping Phil and I with the transition out of PN. And he has this concept called believability, right? So in life, you have to constantly hunt and feedback. And I call it stalking feedback, right? If you want to be better, you have to stalk feedback. You have to be waiting in the bushes, and that as potential feedback is coming along, you have to jump out and grab it and give me feedback, more than just gracefully accepting what's given. You have to solicit it, right?
Yeah.
But how do you know if the feedback's any good? And Ray has this concept of believability, which is a couple of criteria. One, has the person done the thing that you are asking or that you're trying to solve yourself successfully?
That's actually really, you know what? Let's not brush past that point. And I'm not going to go, but that is such a critical thing. That how many times have we had people going, "Oh, I'm just on that."
I blame Richard Branson for that "fake it until you make it" post.
We don't like that. Right. We don't like that. But sorry, I'm not going to blame it. But a lot of people brush over that because they would say, "Well, that's self-evident," you know. But it's not, because when you're with professionals and when you're with other people and they're going, "Yeah, look, don't worry about it. It's like, no. You know what? I will worry about it. Tell me, where are we at? What's happening? Give me some feedback to give me some metrics that I can actually determine if you're actually doing what you're saying or whether."
Well, that's it, right? And
I mean, look at Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right?
And this is the thing, right? This doesn't mean don't listen to people who don't meet these criteria. It's weight advice appropriately, right? So the believability criteria: have they done the thing successfully? Have they done it repeatedly under different conditions, right? So if you're in the financial world, if you've been successful in investing during a period of years that has always the market's just gone up, that's good. But it would be really great if I saw what happened during a couple down cycles too. You know what I mean? Different conditions, right? And then the third thing is, can they explain it in a way that makes sense, right? So, and what makes sense is a couple things. One is I understand it. You can explain it simply. And when I ask my dumb questions, because I use the same exact framing, hey, I'm going to slow everyone down here for a second. And again, I don't know anything about these things, so just if I seem dumb, apologies in advance. But here's my question to you about blah thing that I'm not an expert in, right? It's almost the same language you mentioned. And if they can explain it in a way that I understand and makes sense, but also makes sense for my situation, right? So I have to understand it, because if I can't understand it, it's going to be useless to me. But it also has to make sense in my situation. So the people who can meet all three get a high believability score, right? So my mother-in-law may have some advice, but if she's not done any of these three things, I still listen to her, but I just give her a lower ranking on the believability score, right? As I seek decision-making advice, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a really critical strategy for this part of my career, right? Like, how do I make decisions on things that I am not an expert in? Well, I need to seek and surround myself with believable people. So that's part one, right? I get as much advice as I can, but then I weight the advice appropriately. And then to your point, the very tactical thing is exactly that. I am the guy in the room who's always going, okay, listen, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to ask what's going to probably be a really, really stupid question right now. But I don't quite understand this one aspect of it. Can you help me a little bit? Again, look around the room. And it's a little bit of and you probably agree, Matt, it's a little bit of a game you play now, right? It's a little bit of a script you use, right? You're like, hey, this is how I solicit feedback, right? And how I slow it down and find out if this person's full of crap or not, right? And so look around the room. Apologies, everyone. I'm the dummy here, but it works, right? It's not offensive. It really quickly isolates who's here to help, who knows what they're really doing, and who's not.
Yeah, that's right, because the con man will effectively chastise you for asking that question, or brush it off very quickly, because they don't want the scrutiny, they don't want the spotlight, they don't want that. Whereas the people who genuinely have your best interests at heart and who are experts in that field have no problem. In fact, are probably enamored by it. They actually enjoy it. It's almost like when a kid comes up and asks you something, you know what I mean, who is genuinely interested. You want to, that person wants to show off their expertise almost as well too. That's right. You know what I mean? So yeah, that those questions are pretty good. So in terms then, I guess, of whether people are personal trainers or in the fitness industry, whether they're just interested in health and business, where can they go to learn more about your book, and have you got a website and how you can help them?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't really have much to sell necessarily. So, folks can just pop by johnberardi.com. There I have it's just kind of a bio site where I have all the things that I'm working on or that I have worked on. And if people want to jump off from there, for example, if they're interested in the nutrition stuff we talked about, they can jump over to the Precision Nutrition website and check that out. If they're interested in the Changemaker stuff, they can jump off from there and look at that. Or if they're interested in some of the research we're doing, or that we have done through PN, I have that all linked up there. And then, I post on the socials, as you guys mentioned, semi-regularly, Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that. And that's really it. If folks are interested in the things we talked about, that's really like sort of a what they call disambiguation site, right? It's a site where you can go to figure out what you want to learn from there. And, and from there, there's tons of free stuff too. For example, the Changemaker stuff, we give away a few free chapters of the book, a host of the forms and questionnaires and worksheets and scripts. I've always been a big believer in just delivering a lot of free value to people who are interested. They tend to be the people who you end up having a long-term relationship with. So yeah, on the Changemaker site, there's tons of free downloads and stuff. So if you're curious about career stuff, come there. And at Precision Nutrition, there's tons of free courses and for professionals. So anyway, I won't go on and on, but come check me out at johnberardi.com and you can figure out other stuff from there.
Yeah. Have you guys got any other questions or comments?
No, it's a great. I've been through your website. It's fantastic. Great resources. So certainly go along and check it out.
I just want to bug you for more data mining. Yeah. But we'll do that. We might have to save that for another time. But I have so many. I can imagine the gold that is in that. That's the type of mining I'd be into.
For folks who want to do that, yourself included, I mean, Precision Nutrition blog has always been sort of an open book of our business, right? We unpack how we do remote work and we unpack the data from our studies. And it's fun because sometimes we'll post a really big data rich post, right? And they're not for everyone, right? But we have a beautiful illustrator who does amazing infographics for us. So we turn the data into really beautiful data presentations that, even if you don't have a scientific background and you're not super scientifically literate, you can, actually figure out what's going on here.
That's me.
And there's some of the most fun posts that I see. And there've been a few recently, with some of these major lessons that we've learned. We did one recently on the correlation between compliance, if you want to call it that, in the program and results, because again, people tend to approach health and fitness change with an all or nothing kind of mentality. Like, oh man, if I don't do all the stuff they told me to, then it's worthless. Right. And then we broke up our clients into these quintiles looking at, okay, the people who did 80 to 100% of everything we asked, people who did 60 to 80%, and then we looked at how much weight they lost, what their other clinical outcomes were. And it was fascinating to show that it doesn't drop off. It's literally not all or nothing. People who did 20 to 40% of what we asked were on a curve of results. You know what I mean? And so it was a really cool post that really sort of, again, a lot of this stuff is verbal. We talk about all or nothing concepts and, a little bit is better than nothing. You know what I mean? These kind of ideas. Yeah. But this was a scientific depiction of that.
Yeah.
Something is better than nothing. Look, it's actually this much better than nothing,
so cool.
Yeah, that's cool. You're preaching to someone who is very much always in my life has been an all or nothing, which is terrible. It's actually really bad a lot of the time. So actually hearing that is a good thing for people.
I'm relieved because I couldn't commit to the all, so I did nothing. Most of it. So like doing something sounds to me it's something that's doable.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this soundbite forever, which is, people fall into this all or nothing mentality. At PN, we believe in a different philosophy, which is always something, right?
Yeah.
And so it sounds good and it's a great little soundbite and people throw it in articles and stuff. But I'm like, okay, but that's just me saying words. You know what I mean? Here's actually data that show that if you always are doing something, you will be progressing towards a particular goal, right? Yeah. I love that, right? I love backing up. And again, that's my particular weird combination of I love stories and words and I love data, and you put them together and then you get this thing that I used to do.
No, I mean, I jumped onto your website, was reading the article around office works and always being, constant and, not sitting all the time and just be moving. And, that's really good. And I think for people as well, too, who are lay, who are finding COVID-19 restrictions with a lot of gyms being closed, those sort of things give you the data, as you say, and the information, not that it's just hypothetical, but you can actually maintain or even get results, through just changing your mindset in terms of how you approach that, rather than, again, people like me that gym's closed, I'm sitting on the couch eating ice cream and Netflix,
That's one of the things me and our team implemented when I was editor-in-chief. Every article had to have a section at the end called "What to Do Now," right? So we could have a 5,000 word article on insulin regulation, and then the last piece is what to do now. Here's the 5 things that you need to do based on all this reading.
That's great.
And so it's one of my favorite things what we instituted and that the team continues to do.
And that's something that we do around the office. We teach people around us when we're doing the podcast and we're doing seminars and writing articles. When they review the content, I want them in the back of their mind to be thinking, so what? And it's like, so what? So what are you telling me this for? So what do I do tomorrow? So what is the purpose?
Yes.
The whole time, if I haven't answered the so what, then we haven't done a proper job. And
That's
I encourage people to say, so what, if I haven't. They don't. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Well, look, thanks so much for your time, John. As I said, jump onto John's website, and we'll have the links as well too, so that everyone can follow us. But it's John Berardi. I imagine it's an Italian last name by the looks of that. Is that correct?
It is.
It is.
Yeah. I come from an immigrant family. My parents were both born in Italy.
Right.
Excellent.
Right. So it's johnberardi.com.
Yes.
Perfect. And if you go there, a lot of what we've spoken today, all the links, as John said, are there, so you can sort of, go to Precision Nutrition or check out his new book. It's been really nice talking to you, John. I mean, I love talking the business side of things, the mental side of things. I mean, we're always talking about that. It's not just about, obviously taking a capsule or a tablet or a pill. And the mentality or just lifting a weight or working out, the mentality side of things is fascinating and is faceted in terms of how it helps you with your relationships, your training, your weight loss, your business, your goals. I mean, and I guess one mindset and all these things can extrapolate, which I think you've probably demonstrated really, really, really well today.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation for me as well. Thanks so much for having me on. For everyone who's listened, thank you all. We've been at it for an hour and a half now.
So it's late.
Carried away.
I hope you pulled some value out of what we talked about, and I just really do appreciate all the time everyone spent with us today.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.
Now you can go to bed.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's it for us. And we'll be back next week with some more. But until then, stay well.
Okay.
Right.
See you, John.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.